Now, this was easily documented throughout America's history that the Bible was the basis of education. Christian principles were never separated. We had foreign observers that came for years to America, people like Alexis de Tocqueville, who came here and wanted to see what made America great. Well, one of those individuals that came in 1807 and 1808 was Edward Kendall. He came from Great Britain. He said, what is it that makes America so great? And so for 2 years he traveled America, took meticulous notes to see, and he recorded those notes. As he went from state to state, he looked at agriculture, family, politics, church, etc. When he was in Connecticut, and this is 1807, 1808, he said, what is education like in the United States? And so he cited the educational laws of Connecticut. The reason that Kendall is important is because he's an outside observer, and historians today consider him one of the top foreign observers of America that showed what was going on in America. Now, this is 2 decades after the First Amendment, and listen to what the educational laws said. It said, we, in the General Legislature of the Assembly of Connecticut, have noticed that there are still several among us who are unable to read the English tongue. This greatly disturbs us, for if you're unable to read the English tongue, you're unable to read the Word of God. If you're unable to read the Holy Word of God, you're unable to judge the laws of the state against the Word of God, which means that we might pass a law that would violate the Word of God, and you would never stop us because you can't read. Now, the educational law 2 decades after the First Amendment was still centered on knowing the Word of God to prevent civil atrocities, that the people must know the Word of God. If they could know the Word of God, they could hold their government to the Word of God and thus preclude those atrocities. The fact that Christian principles were the basis of education was evident even at the Supreme Court's own day. In 1892, the teachers' unions of America came together to celebrate education in America. It was the 400th anniversary of Columbus Day. They said, we want to leave a legacy for America of what education has been like in America. And so they went through and documented all the things that the Supreme Court had talked about, the first law, that the universities, how that everything was built on Christian principles. But the teachers' unions noted, they said, but as more and more people began to develop in America, the church said to the state, why don't you take elementary education? We'll keep higher universities, we'll keep upper education. Why don't you start taking elementary education? And so the teachers' unions pointed out that the church voluntarily relinquished elementary education to the state. Now, the teachers' unions in 1892 listened to their comment on this about whether that was a wise decision. Very simply, they said, whether this was wise or not, the decision to relinquish education to the state, they said whether this was wise or not is not our purpose to discuss, further than to remark that, number one, if the study of the Bible is to be excluded from all state schools, number two, if the inculcation of the principles of Christianity is to have no place in the daily program, and number three, if the worship of God is to form no part of the general exercises of these public elementary schools, the teachers' union said, then the good of the state would be better served by restoring all schools to church control. The teachers' unions said, if our public schools ever stop teaching the Word of God, inculcating Christian principles, or get away from the daily worship of God, they said, let's give all schools back to the church, because the government will be much better off, the nation will be much better off. If we ever leave those three principles in education at any point in time, let's give education back to the church. And that's the public school teachers' unions in 1892. So the Supreme Court talked about education, pointed to education as proof of the fact that, yes, we were built on Christian principles, we were founded on Christian principles. Everything from the first public school law in 1642 all the way to the teachers' unions in 1892 proved it.